like that. So, I read it from cover to cover. I had to stop every now and again because I was crying. I know the story, I was anticipating all sorts of things, and it just was overwhelming in many parts. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. It's a sensitive topic, and it's been handled in a very meaningful way on so many levels that I could identify with personally. For our audience today who may not be familiar with your work, could you start by telling us more about your background?
Hi, so thanks, Hazel. Is that volume okay? It sounds very loud.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a journalist by training. I grew up in the UK. I'm not Jewish. My father's family are Jewish but not practicing, so I had no connection to the Jewish community growing up. Although finding out a lot more, thankfully now. I left the UK after university and travelled in Asia for many years and became a journalist at the South China Morning Post and then the Sydney Morning Herald. Is that better? Worked at the Sydney Morning Herald for a long time and then had children and left to set up my own company doing communications and decided when my eldest went to high school, sort of, what will I do now? Should I do a PhD? I'll write a novel. How hard can that be? So that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
So, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your other journalist writing that you do, about communications.
So most of the clients of my company are academics and universities. So I do a lot of science writing, sort of communicating complex science so people can understand. I do a lot of consumer health writing. So, you know, a big client of mine at the moment is the Liver Foundation, and I write all their patient material to help people manage their liver disease, and a lot of government work as well. So all very dry and very boring, which doesn't have to do it. AI is going to take it all over soon anyway.
Certainly. So somewhere I read in small print on the internet about this book you wrote when you were a tiny little girl. Tell us a little more about that.
I think the first book I wrote was when I was about 6. It's called Chicky the Chipmunk. But I've always loved stories. I've always loved to read. The very first novel I read when I was about 6, I think, was Heidi, and I remember my father, who's also a journalist, coming in to take me to sleep, and I was crying, and he said, "Why are you crying?" It's because I don't want the book to finish. You know, and so I've always loved stories, and I've always loved reading, and kind of got swept away into the journalism and the science communication and what have you. So writing fiction has been a complete departure for me, and I absolutely love it.
One more question on that. Like a typical mother, when her mum found this book on Chicky the Chipmunk, she actually photocopied it all and handed it out to all her friends. Like a typical proud mum. Something I would have done as well, wouldn't I, Dina? Okay, so for our audience today who may not be familiar with your work, could you start by telling us more about your background? I've told you that. And can you also set the context for our conversation by describing the main themes, the message and ideas that you hope readers will take away from reading your book?
So the reason I wrote this book was because I encountered a Holocaust survivor who lived close to where I live on the Northern Beaches, Lucie, Pollak, Langford. And I first heard the story. So essentially, she was 15 when she was taken to a labour camp in eastern Poland on the Ukrainian border, and you know, where you were forced to work until you were too weak, and then you were sent to Sobibor. She was a very keen dancer, and amazingly, they put on a dance in the camp, which I think was actually very common in the Holocaust. There was lots of dancing and music. So she did the dance, and one of the Polish guards saw her, fell in love with her, according to her account, and they formed a close relationship, and he got her out. So that was the story. That was the story that grabbed me. But when I met Lucie, she had dementia, and she was this amazingly spiritual, positive, happy person, active in the community, part of Courage to Care, the guide at the Sydney Jewish Museum. And so what I really wanted to write about was not just the escape from the camp, but also how do you survive having gone through something like that as a teenager. So I guess the book is really about survival and how you keep moving forward when the worst in your life has happened to you. Thank you.
Your story is based on the experiences and memoir of Lucie Pollak, Langford, and you can see her photographs up there that the ladies have actually photocopied and put up on the wall for you to look at the real Lucie. And some of you may have encountered Lucie because I understand from Mary that she worked at the Jewish Museum for a number of years. Some of you may actually know her. See, Jeffrey Cohen is with her over there in the middle. So she was a real live person who did a whole lot of work at the Jewish Museum. And you met her and you had that encounter with her, and that must have been a very privileged time. Lucie had written a memoir, and that's the memoir, and you can actually buy the memoir on Amazon. It's an advert for Amazon at $1.07, and you can buy her memoir and read it after you've read Maya's Dance. It'll give you a good insight. So she wrote the memoir, and from that, how much did you draw on her story, and how challenging was it to navigate the path between fact and fiction?
So it was incredibly challenging. When I met Lucie, I only met her once because of COVID. She was in an aged care facility and quite far into her dementia when I met her. But I had the story from the memoir and also her testimony that's at the Jewish Museum. She gave about 12 hours of oral testimony. So when I started writing the book, because I'm a journalist and that's all I knew how to write, I sort of wrote it as, you know, I even called my character Lucie, and I tried to be very faithful to the facts. And then speaking to her husband and her close friend, we had a mutual friend, they were uncomfortable with that, and that's when I realised it would have been impossible for me as a 21st century privileged person, English person living in Sydney, to ever imagine or capture what she had been through. You know, I was telling the story through my eyes and through the lens of my own experience. So that's when I realised it had to be fiction. So while all the events in it are true, the things that I described, the events that happened were true, but obviously the characterisation and the other characters are all from my imagination. And sort of half the book is not in the camp, it's in later life when Lucie's going back to find the guard who tried to get her out. So all of that is completely fiction. And you know, I just think that's the way to go. I think the only people who have the authority really to tell their stories are the people who went through it. So this is clearly, it's a novel, it's fiction, and I'm not trying to say that it was Lucie's story, it's Maya's story.
So having worked with many Montefiore, many Holocaust survivors, they would say you could never understand, you could never explain that. So it's really good you've taken that angle. So you call the book Maya's Dance, and why do you think dance is so critical to the story?
Well, Lucie, or Maya in my story, was a dancer. So she loved to dance, and all through the book, the way that she sort of takes herself out of the horror of the camp is by dancing, even if it's just, you know, doing a few pliés on the platform if she's getting taken off. And actually I discovered, because I researched it very, very heavily, you know, being a journalist, that's my comfort zone. There was actually dance all through the Holocaust, so and music, you know, and then I thought, well, why wouldn't you? You know, it was if you were faced with that kind of deprivation, that kind of horror, I think you would grab at any skerrick of joy you possibly could. So the dance is that, but also the dance sort of signifies her continuing into life. Like the real Lucie was a spiritual, kind, lovely person who, travelled in India and swam in the Ganges and wore long flowing scarves and, just a real live spirit. So that's what I wanted to capture as well. And then of course the dance is how she meets the guard who falls in love with her, who helps her escape.
The Polish guard.
Yes, yeah, he's not a Nazi. Because the other thing I hadn't realised until I started doing the research was how subjugated the Polish people were at the time as well. So the real Jan was an engineer who was working on this irrigation project, and the prisoners were all made to dig trenches, and he was advising on that. He was only in his early 20s, and he was sent there to tell them where to dig, essentially, but he wasn't a Nazi.
And they were all seconded to dig the channel, all those channels.
The Jewish people were, yes. So there were 500 people in the camp at Sarwin, and Lucie was the only survivor.
So Maya and Jan may be based on real people, but they are your creations. Tell us more about their characters.
So the most amazing thing about writing fiction, and any author will tell you this, you sort of start out with an idea of what the story is, which I had from the memoir, but then the characters kind of become real. And it's as if they're sort of sitting over your shoulder telling you what to write. So I hadn't really written much of the character of Jan when I first submitted the book, and the editor said, oh, we need to have Jan in it. Not what he does, but what he's thinking, which I found very, very hard because, of course, there's the whole question of consent. He was a guard, she was a prisoner, he was a lot older than her, so it was very troubling to me. Why would he have risked his life to save her like this? But then as soon as I started writing him, he just all over the page and just came flooding out. And I guess Maya as well. So Maya is really real to me. She's still with me. So I've tried to embody in Maya the wisdom that I've read and gained from the interviews with Holocaust survivors and from people like you who have worked with Holocaust survivors. So that's what I'm really trying to capture in Maya. So for me, she's a bit of a pinnacle of how to move forward with your life and how to live with kindness.
And for me, the romance of it was that he fell in love with her at first sight when he saw her dancing. And from that moment on, not only was he fell in love with her, but he decided he was going to save her life. And I don't think there was any sexual connotations attached to that.
No. Well, correct. So the way I met Lucie was through a mutual friend, Sonia, who was a dance physio and had known Lucie for many years and became her guardian, very, very, very close friend. And Lucie categorically said to Sonia that there was no sexual relationship there. There are definitely people who don't believe that, but honestly, I don't think it matters. He risked his life to save her and others. So he was recognised as a righteous among the nations.
And his mother as well and sister?
Yes, because
all three were.
Because when he got them out, when Jan got them out, he eventually hid Maya under in a sort of hole underneath a bakery, and she just couldn't stand it after a few days because she's too claustrophobic. So he said, okay, I'll take you to my parents' apartment. The mother and the sister knew she's there, and they hid her behind. They had a dresser pulled over a sort of corner in the wall, and she hid there for quite a few days. And the father was the chief of police of the area, so incredibly dangerous for all of them.
Chief of police and a Nazi.
Well, he's Polish.
Yes, Polish. She was on the side of the Nazis,
Yes.
so that was kind of your heart was thumping when you were reading that part. So Kate is heartbroken when we meet her at the beginning. Yet it was contrasted with Maya's lifelong yearning to reconnect with Jan. Her loss seems insignificant. One of the things that struck me about your book that is despite Maya's life experiences, she's able to remain resilient, positive, and she shares her messages of hope, kindness, and goodness. Perhaps you can just reflect a little bit more. I know you've already discussed some of that. on the quality, and more personally, if it's changed your own outlook?
So the device I use in the book is Maya is being interviewed for a newspaper story by a young journalist called Kate, who is very closely modelled on me when I first arrived in Sydney in 1992 and worked at the Sydney Morning Herald. And, you know, I think I was saying before, one of my first assignments was after Schindler's List came out, and they sent me along to George Street to interview the Holocaust survivors. You know, I was so naive, I didn't know what to say. You know, the things that were concerning me in my life were boys and, you know, just rubbish compared to what they had experienced. And I think a lot of journalists feel like that, you know, very humbled by the people we have the honour to interview. So that's what I wanted to bring in. So Kate is supposed to be there to show sort of all of our lives in modern day Sydney and how easy life really is compared to somebody who lived through the Holocaust. And yet Maya is the one with the insight and the wisdom that helps pull Kate out of her funk and kind of go forward positively. So what I've learned, I think, you know, that the main thing is kindness. You know, that the importance of grabbing hold of life, because so many of the Holocaust survivors that I interviewed talk about this, they're wanting to make it worth it. You know, that when so many others didn't survive, that they had the luck or the privilege, or for whatever reason they managed to survive, and they want to get the most out of life. I know not all people feel like that, but there are some very special people who do think that. And also the power of human relationships. So one of the key texts that inform the book is Mad Search for Meaning, which I hadn't read before this. I absolutely loved it, by Viktor Frankl. And you know, it's this whole idea of the people who did well, not just in terms of their preserving their life in the Holocaust, but managing to make lives for themselves afterwards with people who had someone to love and who were loved. And I just think that's really important.
So perhaps you'd like to share the Viktor Frankl at the beginning of the course. Has everybody read Man's Search for Meaning? If you haven't, that's one of the books you need to read.
So it's just a little quote at the start of the book. So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist in Vienna who, when he was arrested by the Nazis, his biggest concern was that his unpublished journal article, his latest article, was not published yet, so he put it in his pocket and took it off to the camp. And the way he got through, he was sent to Auschwitz, and the way he got through was sort of observing everybody around him as a psychiatrist and working out what it was that enabled people to survive. And the quote I've used in the book: the second way of finding a meaning in life is by experiencing something, such as goodness, truth and beauty, by experiencing nature and culture, or, last but not least, by experiencing another human being in his very uniqueness, by loving him.
And I think he went around, thank you for that, he went around the camp where he was in Auschwitz, from what I read in the book, and he watched human behavior and saw that life had to have a meaning somewhere along the line, and worked on that positive side of it, and spoke with the people and made them be positive about their life. So, the relationship between mothers and daughters is the key element of the novel. Rosa, her mum, particularly shows tremendous strength when she learns she is about to be sent to the death camp. And in Rosa's words, and quoting from the memoir, she says to her, she's standing when the commandant comes and says, do you want to take, I'm not giving away the story, am I? Do you want to go along with your mother? Because I've come to collect her, she's going to Sobibor, I think, yeah? And Rosa looked at her, she knew that she'd fallen in love with Jan, but she didn't tell anybody about it because she didn't want her to be caught in any way whatsoever. And when she stood and looked back at her daughter, and the daughter was asked by that disgusting commandant, whether she wanted to go with her mother, and her mother turned around and said, "This is the most difficult journey of my life. Lucie, choose life. Lucie Line, my liebste Lucie Line. I gave you birth, not to die with me in hell. I needed you to love, for both of us, to love, to experience, to grow and to give." And she turned her back and walked away, and Lucie never saw her again. So, can you then tell me how important it was, this thread of these experiences through the story?
So at the time I was writing the book, my own mother was very unwell. She died about 18 months ago of dementia, but so that there's a very strong thread of dementia through the book as well. But yeah, I suppose I was experiencing the loss of my own mother, and also I have 3 children. You know, I'm very close to my daughters, and it just, while it's a love story between Maya and Jan, it's also a love story between the mother and the daughter, and you know, having the relationship with Jan sustain Maya, but for the mother it was having her daughter with her that helped her to keep going. So yeah, that's really central. And then Kate, by contrast, has a terrible relationship with her own horrible mother in England.
It's true or not? One of the most confronting scenes in the novel is the birth of those beautiful twins, to Erna and Pavel, who begin this beautiful romantic relationship in a camp. Are they based on real people, and did this happen?
So yes, Erna and Pavel are real people. I didn't change their names, because I don't know what their surnames are. Erna was a young girl about Lucie's age, who she saw just when they were queuing for bread one day, and they formed an instant relationship. She was already married to Pavel, and it was Erna who was organising the dance that Lucie danced at, and they escaped at the same time. I can't let you know what happened to them, because that's in the book, but yeah, as I said, Lucie was the only survivor. The twins is true, but I don't think they were Erna and Pavel's twins. Lucie doesn't say in her memoir, she just talks about the birth of twins in the camp. So I decided to give those to Pavel.
Okay, twins to them. And we won't tell you what happens to the twins. You'll have to buy the book to read that. Kate is the central character in the book. Essentially, she's the storyteller. But she's so much more than that. How much is she based on your own experiences as a journalist?
Well, like I was saying, you know, the problem with being a journalist, you're very much telling other people's stories the whole time, and you kind of feel like you're not really, I don't know how much difference you're making in the world yourself. You would know that, you know, it's constantly reflecting other people's greatness, I suppose. So I've got Kate doing that, but then she's so influenced by Maya and Maya's outlook that she does allow herself to be changed, and that's kind of the cardinal rule in journalism. You don't get involved, you don't feel any emotion, you just report the facts. So, and I suppose, you know, the way I describe her is how it was when I got to Sydney, but in a way I'm kind of following her journey as well. I'm trying to tell the story, but as an author it's also changing me as I go, and it really has. It's changed my outlook on the world, just having the time speaking to people who went and reading stories about the Holocaust.
So we'll just get the one question. Your story is set at the Samhain camp in Poland. Tell us about how you researched the camp, your visit to that particular area, and the other camps that you visited over the years.
Oh yeah, that's the story. So the way I wrote the book, I decided I wanted to write a novel, but I had no idea how to do it. So I did a novel writing course, the Faber Writing Academy, which if anybody is interested in writing a novel, I'd really highly recommend. I couldn't have done it without it. And then just about finished that, and then COVID happened, which was actually really interesting because, you know, everybody was buying their toilet paper and people were profiteering, and, you know, in some ways it's great event that everybody was going through reflected what it must have been like, you know, in 1939 to some extent. Then anyway, halfway through 2020, we were in lockdown, and my father, who, I'm the only child and he's in the UK, had a very serious heart attack and wasn't expected to survive. So I had to rush over there and get special dispensation from the government and the whole thing, you know. Flew over there, couldn't contact him, he was in intensive care. By the time I got there, he's sitting up in bed and he's feeling much better. So he went off into rehab for a week, and Europe was open while Australia was shut. So I thought, I'm going to go to Poland. You know, who knew when I would have the opportunity again? So I was lucky enough to go to Poland for 5 days. Saw a neo-Nazi rally in Krakow, which surprised me and shocked me. Went to Auschwitz and Sobibor, where I left. So Sobibor is where Lucie's mother died, so I left a $2 coin there as a sort of a mark of Australia. And then I went to Samhain, which is just a little rural village. The thing that absolutely struck me that I wasn't expecting is there's no remnant of the Holocaust there. I would be very surprised if anybody in Samhain even knows there was a labour camp there, completely obliterated. There's a big tank, you know, memorial to the partisans that fought off the Nazis, and there's a small Jewish cemetery with probably about 40 graves in it. I mean, given that we know 500 people died there, you know, they obviously weren't buried there. It's just the obliteration of history. Is incredible.
Nobody would ever know it happened. Thank you. The question of appropriation continues to arise in all fields of art and culture. What are your thoughts, and how did you navigate these sensitivities?
So I probably couldn't have chosen a more fraught subject as my debut novel than the Holocaust. You know, so while I was writing, Heather Morris was going through the whole problem that she's had. So she wrote her books as fact, or the first couple of books, and they've been, some of the facts have been discredited. So now she's started calling them fiction. So there was that issue. Also, as I mentioned, I'm not Jewish, I'm half Jewish, and whether I even have the right to tell that story. After thinking about it and reading really widely about it, you know, I have young people, a lot of their friends, I don't think would even know that the Holocaust existed. We know that through recent surveys. It's like 1 in 8 people, I think, have never heard of the Holocaust. So I just think I've got the skill of research, and I've got the skill as a writer. It was a story that Lucie wanted to be told. She'd been to numerous writing classes, and she'd written her own memoir. I had the permission of her family, and I thought, well, I can tell this story. And actually, I'm really glad that I did, because it's been picked up really widely in schools. So, which I never expected that. I thought it would appeal to kind of middle-aged ladies like me, but it's a lot of teenagers are reading it as well, which I think is a really good thing. So I hope I've done a good thing by writing.
Thank you. What has been the response from those who are related to survivors, and what challenges did you face?
I've only met a few people related to survivors who have read it, so it's been positive, which is absolutely the most gratifying thing, and it was the most terrifying thing when the book came out, that you know, I was going to get emails and letters from people saying it wasn't anything like that, and how dare you write that. I haven't had any of those. It's been very positive, which I'm really, really happy about. Yes, and would love to meet more, I suppose. And I think most Holocaust survivors themselves are very old, and probably, I don't know if they would have read it. Lucie's husband didn't read it. I took him every draft actually to check, and he went, oh, that's a lot of words. So he never read it. But
from my experience, people who want to revisit it again, yeah. So that does present a challenge, because you don't really get the insight, and also with them being that much older, you probably wouldn't get the correct fact any longer. So similarly to the diary of Anne Frank, there are times when Maya has to survive confinement. Your descriptions of these moments are extraordinarily powerful, particularly for a generation who has never experienced war or lost freedom. Tell us about these passages and the extent to which you drew on testimonies.
Actually, this is going to sound awful, but I didn't so much draw on testimony for those. So she's confined in two places. Obviously, she's in the camp, so she's a prisoner, but then she's hidden for a while in this place underneath the bakery with a couple of other people, which is true. It was a very small, dank, dark hole, completely no light in there at all, full of spiders, and then she was hidden behind the bureau. So that all comes from my imagination, but it's going to sound awful. When I came back from seeing my dad and visiting Poland, I had to go into hotel quarantine. That was a lovely hotel room, I get that, but I was locked in for 2 weeks, which had never happened to me before. And by the end of the 2 weeks, I was absolutely so desperate to get out, and I felt it as a physical pressure on my chest. It's like the anxiety of not being able to open a door or a window. So I'm not in any way equating that with what it would be like to be hiding for your life, of course, but it gave me that sense, that physical sense of confinement that I then drew on and used my imagination to amplify.
So when she was hidden in the bureau in Jan's house, the father didn't know about it. Is that actually in the memoir, or did you?
Yeah, that's
in
real.
the memoir?
Yes,
That's for real.
yes.
And he never really knew about that at all.
No. So I imagine what happened to his family afterwards. It's not in Lucy's memoir, we don't know, because she never saw Jan again, and never found what didn't find his family. So I've amplified, yes, he was chief of police, and the mother, when Lucy arrived, fresh out of the concentration camp and having hidden in this hole, like she must have been filthy and exhausted and starving, and the mother served her a lovely meal and said, "Oh, just please be very quiet because we don't want my husband to hear," and just made a bed up for her behind the bureau and hid her. That's the most extraordinary thing.
And he never knew about it. And what about the time when she was trying to find Jan with Danuta, the sister? Tell us a little bit about that.
So Jan had, in real life, he had two sisters, so I've only got one in the book called Danuta, and she was a teenager when Maya goes to hide in the room, and then this is all made up, this is all fiction, but I had to have a reason for Jan to have wanted to save Maya apart from being in love, and so I had it being his rebellion against his father, and he joins the resistance and goes and fights in the Warsaw Uprising and what have you. So I have it that he kind of left his family because he thought they were all Nazis and they never saw him again.
And we won't tell you what happens. You have to buy the book to find out. I'll be your sales lady. So you're a first-time fiction author, and I believe you've nailed it. Yeah. As a professional writer, what did you learn most in the realm of fiction?
It's a completely different form of writing. As I was saying, most of what I write is science and medical stuff, and to allow yourself to write fiction. So the first draft, they edit it again and again and again, and you have to rewrite umpteen times and what have you. And the first time, the editor just kept going through and saying, "I want more, what did it feel like? What did it look like? What did it smell like?" So you have to stop and give yourself that luxury of putting yourself in there. It's not just the facts. They say in fiction you have to show, not tell, and that's the thing that I found by far the hardest in writing fiction. And also the structure, like to write 100,000 words, to keep a story going for that long is difficult. And when I started, I had this really complex structure with then going back to Poland to find him interposed with what was happening in the camp, and that all went completely wrong. It was terrible. So I rewrote it the way it is now. So yeah, so in terms of tricks of the trade, it was a real learning curve for me. In terms of the effect on me, it's just when you're writing a novel, you're just always looking for ways of describing things in new and interesting and beautiful ways. So, I might see the leaves outside the window and look at the light on them and think, what word could I use that maybe nobody's used before to describe what that looks like? And I love that, and it means that you really start noticing the world around you, people's faces. So many people I've seen on trains and walking down the street are in my next book. It's a lovely occupation.
Yeah, and I think that your descriptions are superb in the book. It was just really brilliant. Thank you. Would you like to read a little bit from the novel and share it with all of us?
So the passage I'm reading is actually from the epilogue, but it sort of sums up what the book's about. So by now, Maya is in aged care. She's quite far into her dementia. She doesn't really know what's going on. All her life she's been writing letters to Jan, the great love that she never saw again after he rescued her. So while she's not writing the letter, she's sort of thinking the letter. My darling Jan, today children are visiting. They fidget at the front of the room, running their fingers over their instruments. How old are they? They can't be more than 6 or 7. Some will leave here deeply disturbed. That's to be expected. The dementia ward is nothing if not distasteful. Its drooling mouths and the waft of urine. I sit in my recliner chair as I write to you. Well, not so much write as think. There's no difference now between thought and memory, dreams and speech. It's all the same thing. Thousands of images, snatches of moments, pictures on the wall. The boys are giggling. One shoves his neighbour. The girl behind pokes them both in the ribs. She has glasses and her hair is tied back with a bow. She's taking her duty seriously and her recorder is at the ready. On cue, the music starts. I watch the children through the blur of semi-closed eyelashes. The notes are discordant but strong, played with conviction. My body is too weak to move along to the beat. I can no longer tell my hands what to do. They fly through the air or jerk from my lap, clawing at my face like little animals and making me jump. But still the notes carry me. They make today a good day. My life is not so bad as it sounds. It is still a life after all. And this is not the first time I've lost my privacy and freedom. Sometimes when the carers manhandle me into the shower or flash their torches in the night, I find myself back in the dark hole, yearning for the light. But the urge to survive is still strong.
It's a great skill to have, really is. Congratulations. So finally, Lucie declared she did not want to spend her life hating Germans. She wanted her story to be told. What do you think it's like seeing Maya's dance sitting on bookshelves and being read on buses and trains?
I'm really happy that the story's out there, and especially at the moment when there's sort of massive upsurge in hatred, and I'm not just talking about the Middle East, I'm talking about, I think, everywhere at the moment, even in Sydney, some guy had a massive road rage incident at me the other day. It's just so angry and so upset, and you just wonder what's going on, and I just wish people could get a bit more of Lucie's wisdom in their life and just know, hatred is what starts it all. I just wish people would be a bit kinder.
Right, let's have some questions from the audience. Is that okay with you?
You said your father's family weren't practicing Jews and didn't identify with it. How much of this book is a bit of a catharsis for you in relation to the background, the lack of background in Jewish life that you had or not had?
Well, this book wasn't so much because I feel like I already knew about the Holocaust a bit. Everybody's taught that in school. But the next book that I've nearly finished. So my great-grandfather was a cantor. He had a beautiful voice, and he was the cantor of the East London Synagogue, and arrived in the UK in 1905 from what's now Ukraine. So that imagined escape from the pogroms in Ukraine is the subject of my next book, and I'm just researching everything I can, and I'm absolutely loving it. And I was saying to Hazel, I went to the Jewish Food Festival the other day because I want to describe what the food tastes like and what it looks like. And I just felt like I was at home. It's absolutely lovely.
Hazel, can I ask 2 questions, please? You've already covered these briefly. First of all, I'd like to know, you mentioned how much this whole experience has changed you. Could you elaborate on that, please? And also, as a writer, how difficult is it to mix fact and fiction?
So in terms of how it's changed me, I mean, I think, you know, I always had a sense that kindness and lust for life was important, and I guess that's, you know, how I've tried to live my life, but I hadn't really put words around it before. And reading Lucie's memoir from somebody who went through that experience, and the fact that she had forgiven those who did it to her, that absolutely blew me away. So I've definitely made a conscious effort to try and live my life like that where I can. Yeah, I guess that, and also having published the books changed my life. You know, I've got lots of friends now who are authors, and I do things like this. I mean, I was a terrified public speaker before, so the fact I can sit in front of an audience and speak, I'm even more proud about that than in front of them. So yes, it's been life-changing in quite a few ways. And so the second question is
How difficult is it as a writer to mix fact and fiction?
yeah, it's really a fraught area, especially when you're writing about the Holocaust. So I spoke to the publisher at length about it, because this is somebody's real life that I'm writing about, and I'm absolutely conscious of that. And she was saying, well, I mean, everything about it is fiction. You look at the cover, you know it's fiction. It clearly says that it's fiction, so hopefully nobody will think that I'm claiming that it's a factual story. But I really wanted the essence of it to be real. So the way I got around that, there's a long author's note. It goes to all the things in it. So, you know, the geography of the camp I've made up because I don't know what it is like, but, you know, this, you know, cooking pancakes actually really happened kind of thing. So it goes through point by point and lets you know what I've imagined. But I mean, I think every book, even narrative non-fiction, brings in the author's imagination. So, yes, it was very tricky.
I'd like to ask you, did Lucie get to dance in Australia? Did she reach a certain level of dance? Did she pursue her dancing?
She danced all her life, not professionally. I don't know what level she danced actually. I don't think she performed.
But it played a large part of her happiness and joy.
Absolutely. But I understand from my friend Sonia that it was sort of Indian interpretive dance, that sort of thing. So, no, she definitely danced all her life. And she loved music as well. She worked in a music shop, I think, for quite a long time. And music was huge for her.
And did the second love of her life, which I assume she did have a partner later on, did he cope with her remembering her first love?
Yeah, so she actually had 3 husbands. Yeah. The first, she met very soon after the war, and he was kind of her ticket out of Europe, I think, so they came to Australia together. He was also a Holocaust survivor, turned to drink, who can blame him, so that didn't last. And then she was married to a much older man who she absolutely loved, but he wasn't suitable. And then she actually met the husband who stuck, that's how she describes it. She met him in her mid-50s through, RSVP, but it wasn't called that then. You know, in the 90s, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was sort of a dating service. And you know, they had dinner together, and they just talked into the night. And she didn't tell him that she was a survivor for quite a long time afterwards. He was very behind her writing her memoir. He helped her try and track down Jan. He writes the prologue to her memoir, so yeah, he was very on board, but he just loved Lucie. And the way he described his relationship is that she changed his life in the way the story has changed my life.
I just wanted to ask, how did Jan get out of the camp? And what happened to him? What happened to them? Why didn't they get together? Why wasn't there no time for them to be together after their escape?
So well, that's kind of the plot of the book, but in a nutshell. So, I mean, it's an incredible story. He somehow, without being seen, got a ladder up to the window. She climbed out of the window, climbed down the ladder, crept past where the Ukrainian guards were, all drinking and everything, got to the bakery, hid her under the bakery, then hid her in his parents' house, and then they were trying to get false papers for her, so he saw the best way of her getting out was to be Polish. She was very, very good at languages, so she learned Polish quite easily. So he got her false papers, put her on a train, they kissed goodbye, and that was it. And you know, after the war, communism came to Poland. She just says in the memoir she didn't want any more isms. She wanted to get away from as far away from Europe as she can. So yeah, she didn't feel it.
This might seem a very kind of I think everybody can hear me, can't they? This might appear to be a very unimportant question, but why did you call it Maya's dance? The reason why I ask is my granddaughter's called Maya, so it kind of sticks out. But why Maya?
It's actually a great question, to which I have the answer. So, what's not in it got cut out of the book, but in Lucie's memoir. So, after she got on the train, she went as a Polish slave girl to Germany. So she lived undercover in Germany for 2 years, pretending to be Polish. So whenever she would encounter real Polish people, she was terrified because she obviously had an accent, but the Germans didn't realise that she was Czech, not Polish. And she lived for most of that in a convent where she had been taken because she got an infected hand, and she begged the nuns to allow her to stay in the convent. So she was there until she was 19, and she loved going to the chapel, to the Christian. She had to do communion, the whole thing, and she absolutely loved that, and she loved the Virgin Mary, and had a very spiritual sort of awakening around the Virgin Mary, even though she was practicing Jew her whole life. And in fact, when she met her future husband Peter, she told him her name was Mary. So her favourite name was Mary. So when I asked Peter for ideas about what I could call my character, he said, well, Mary or Maria. So I chose the Czech version, which is Maya, and then when she escapes, she becomes Maria.
That was so fascinating. It was amazing. This question is not about the actual story itself. You mentioned that writing fiction sort of changed the way that you felt sometimes. And you talked about, if you look at the description of something for the book specifically, that you want to work out just what's the best way, unusual way of describing it. Has it, because you've been before this more in the realm of fact, has it changed the way that you look at something? Like, for example, not if you're specifically writing, but just, you know, you go down the street and you see light on leaves or something like that. Has it actually changed the way that you look at the world?
It's definitely increase my sense of wonder in the world, because if you're trying to describe something poetically, you see it in a poetic way. So more so when I'm in the middle of writing, so I'm finishing off the next book now, so I'm absolutely, wide-eyed wherever I'm walking. But I mean, I'm still working in my day job, so most of the time I'm still have my head buried in government reports and things, and that's not very poetic, unfortunately.
Helen, could I just ask you, you mentioned you went back to Selwyn and there's no sign of the camp there, but the story and the truth of it is that the Jewish people dug trenches there for agricultural purposes. So is there sign of agriculture there?
Oh yes, the trenches are still there, and there's a bridge. If you Google Lucie, there's actually a picture of her sitting with yarn by a bridge, and that's still there. So yes, their toil wasn't in vain, and in fact that part of Poland became, they grew wheat there to feed Germany essentially. So yes, it wasn't all in vain. It's still like relevant.
One area that you haven't discussed is the impact on your own family, on your husband and children, all being immersed in this book, this other life.
I mean, they're very supportive. My youngest is 18 and the eldest is 26. So my husband, bless him, he read the first draft, which is absolutely rubbish in hindsight, and he cried. Well, that was such a lovely thing. So they've absolutely supported me. I think, my son hasn't read it. The thing that's affected my daughters the most is the descriptions of losing the mother, because they saw the effect on me of losing my mum last year. So that made them cry a bit. But no, I think they're very supportive. I mean, kids don't care what parents do if you do. It's just our mums are talking about writing a book again. Where's my daughter?
Everything really, Mary. So in conclusion, we just want to say thanks again for sharing your insights with us today. It's really clear from the questions and from your book that you have the potential to resonate with readers on so many levels. So as we wish you continued success with this book and all your future projects, let's sit back and imagine we were all at the 2025 New Year's Day Vienna Philharmonic concert. And if you've read the book or know that the music that was played, that she had to do her tap dance to, was the traditional Radetzky March. So with that, can we applaud Helen for her insights and how dance changed the life of Maya? Is at the end of May, where we have Mark Myerson talking about Jewish athletes in the Olympics. In August,